Not here. I just wanted to record a quick tutorial about how to make a procedural mesh, procedural textures, and show some of that in action. All right, you'll need a dev tip, and you'll want to create new empty object. It's generally the place I start from. Um, what I typically do is I'll start attaching components to add the procedural mesh and all the different properties to my object. I'll go into assets here, procedural meshes, and we'll start with a very simple box mesh. Um, any of these procedural meshes will have a series of properties, some more complex than others. Box mesh is very simple. It has a X, Y, Z scale here. So I'm going to start by setting it just a bit smaller. And I'm going to use this button here, Setup Render. This is going to add two components to the slot, Mesh Render and PBS Metallic. The PBS Metallic is just a generic example material that is created for you and put on the mesh render, and it took the mesh already on the slot and dropped it into the mesh renderer for me. Um, so typically I don't like to use PBS Metallic. I might use a specular. So again, I'm going to attach a component, assets, and this time a material. Use a PBS specular, pick up the material and drop it into the reference. Cool. Um, in addition to procedural meshes, you might want to use a procedural texture, like the QR codes we use in Cubics a lot. So procedural textures, it's in that same assets category, and string QR code texture. This is going to have a fair number of values on here. Payload, that's where you'd put like the text or URL if you actually wanted to make a scannable QR code. And you can control the colors here. I'll just pick two colors really quick, and you can hold it and see a preview. What we want to do is grab this component itself and just drop it into the texture of the material we created earlier. We can see it is now applied to the box. You'll notice that I can't, if I clear gizmos, I can't select this box or physically interact with it because it doesn't have a collider yet. So that's the next step. Uh, For that, we'll want to go to the physics category, colliders, and pick the appropriate collider. For box mesh, we'll just use box collider, cone for cone, and mesh for some of the more complex meshes that don't match here. So I have a box collider, so now I can yeah, select my empty object. And you'll see that the box collider is actually much larger than the mesh at the moment. So what I need to do is use a fun little button here called Set from Local Bounds. And that will grab the dimensions of your mesh and put it into the collider itself. You could also manually type in those values. This is just like another real quick thing to do. Um, so that is procedural mesh, creating a material, creating a procedural texture, applying a collider. If you want to make it grabbable, attach component, transform, interaction, grabbable. Now my box is grabbable. Maybe I want to walk on this box. So character collider, and now I can physically climb on the box. That's just a property here on the box collider itself. Um, and that's essentially the workflow. So there's a lot of different procedural meshes in that list, and you might not yet know what they look like or how to set them up. Some of these, when you hit them like a point mesh or point cluster, you just won't see anything when you hit the setup render button. So it helps to have some examples. And luckily, there are already examples in a public folder. So in your inventory, Neos Essentials, Assets, 3D Models, Procedural Meshes is either all or most of the procedural meshes in that list can be found here. Some quick examples of how they are set up. and you can spawn one of these out, inspect them, and look at some of the different properties. And there's also like a quick preview of like, this is the shape I need to build the thing I am trying to replicate with procedurals. Um, yeah, that is just a quick overview of procedural meshes, procedural textures, and where you can see some examples. I hope this has been helpful.